Good afternoon and welcome. This is our community projects panel. As Patrick said, my name is Michelle Wilson, and I'm going to be your host for this discussion. I'm a member of one of the projects that we'll be talking about today, the Coves Collective. So, as a contributing artist and research assistant on the GardenShip and State project, I was privileged to act as a coordinator for 4 community projects that GardenShip supported. It had always been a goal of GardenShip to empower community-engaged projects to carry the ethos of environmental and social justice beyond the exhibition. So it's been truly inspiring to see how the works we're discussing today have brought these ideas to life. On the panel, we have representatives from 3 of the projects. The 4th, a collaboration with Embassy Cultural House, will be discussed by Olivia Masudo in the next panel on community. So, if you're inspired by what you hear today, I encourage you to check out our community projects table. Under the banners, you'll find more information from us about our projects through the almanac, also materials from Athloza, Embassy Cultural House, and other odds and ends. And the almanac is free for anyone attending the symposium today, so I hope you'll help yourself, and also cookies as a gift when you leave, so don't miss those. So I'm going to just start off by giving you a brief introduction of all the individuals and their projects, and then I'll turn it over to them to tell you more about each in turn. So first we have Brandon Doxtator, who I believe is on the Zoom call, and Tom Cull. Brandon Doxtator is the Environment and Consultation Coordinator for the Oneida Nation of the Thames. Recently, you may have seen him online or in the news advocating for his community's fundamental human right to clean drinking water. Tom Cull is a poet and creative writing instructor at Western. He also co-founded Antler River Rally, a group that organizes monthly Deshkanzibi cleanups. In addition, he recently became a community partner specialist at the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. In 2022, Brandon and Tom identified a 50-hectare strip of land owned by Western University that borders the Oneida Nation of the Thames. It had been left in a state of disuse by UWO for years. Together, they organized a cleanup of this beautiful spot along the river. They hope this act of care will be a first step towards developing a shared environmental stewardship study program between the Indigenous Initiatives Office at Western University and the Oneida Nation of the Thames. With GardenShip and state support, Tom and Brandon produced Confluences, a short documentary around the cleanup, which communicates a compelling story about possible decolonial futures with the land. And I'm so glad to say that I think today will be its first public screening. So next we have Candace Dube. Candace is a cultural justice coordinator at Athloza Family Healing Services. She has a background in social justice and peace studies and a Bachelor of Education. Candace's work in the community embodies the idea of an interconnected world, and that when we care for quote-unquote nature, we care for ourselves. She is currently pursuing a master's in therapeutic herbalism. In the summer of 2022, Candace became a member of the Coves Collective, and with GardenShip and state support, planned to return to the land in collaboration with Athloza's Children's Cultural Summer Camp, sorry, my nerves are getting to me. Bimadzuin, sorry. It is easier, which translates to the good life in Anishinaabe. So next to Candace, we have, that's when I was imagining you were going to be on the stage. So following Candace, we will have another member of the Coves Collective, Reilly Knowles. Reilly is an interdisciplinary artist whose work combines beauty with a quiet attentiveness to reciprocal relationships and an almost mystical connection to the more than human. Last summer, he researched natural dyes using abundant plants in the coves. He dyed all the textiles used in Tracing Careful Paths, a community-produced map of the coves, which you can see later on the community projects table. And in the fall of 2022, he organized a workshop at the coves on ethically foraging and using black walnuts to dye textiles. And finally, we have Marshall Stonefish with us. He is a filmmaker and a member of the Sweet Labor Art Collective. For the past few years, he's been working with the collective on Compost, Recomposing Relations, a video piece employing dance as a mediation on death, burial practices, and soil and making soil as a form of ecological care across the city of London, Ontario, and the Oneida Nation of the Thames. In November 2022, Sweet Labor held a community gathering, performance, and screening to celebrate the work, and Marshall was there to create a documentary about the event. We're so lucky to have Marshall with us here today, and he's going to be sharing clips from both the dance performance and the community gathering. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Brandon and Tom, and then we'll go through our whole lineup, and we'll leave space at the end for Q&A. You want to help me welcome up Tom?
Hey, everyone. Hey, Brandon.
Hello, Sagoli Tom.
Good to see you. Yeah, well, welcome, everyone. It's lovely to be here. It's good to be amongst friends and folks that we've worked with on these projects. So just a little bit of background. My partner who's here, Miriam Love, and I started this river cleanup group a number of years ago. And we do monthly cleanups of the river. And I was asked to give a presentation to the GardenShip and State Collective when it was first coming together those 3 years or 4 years ago, right here in this space. And after I gave the presentation, I was asked to come on board, which was really, really nice to produce something for the show. And Brandon and I had worked together before organizing river cleanups at Oneida. And so we came up with this idea. Oh, thank you. Should I be doing that? Yeah, so we came up with the idea that we would host a couple of river cleanups at Oneida and in London, and that we would just bring a film crew along with those cleanups and capture those cleanups and talk to people about their ideas of water, what water meant to them, early memories of water, these kinds of things, and then also get them to reflect a little bit about what it meant to be collecting this garbage along this beautiful river. And from that, we made a film called Upstream, Downstream. And it was really meant to kind of think about the ways water connects us. Water connects us all, connects us to the land and us to each other, but how it also, marks it marks disconnection, right? And thinking through the fact that here in London, you can turn on to open your faucet and have fresh, clean water, and 20 minutes down the road at Oneida, on a boil water advisory and do not have that same privilege. So water is both, a medium of connection, and also disconnection. So that was the film that we produced for the show. And then we followed that up with a community project, which is another film, which we're gonna show you today. And I'm gonna pass it over to Brandon to maybe talk about, the origins of that project and how we went about it.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And Sagoli Swagweg, Brandon Doxtator, Nyongets, Ogwali Niwagi Delode, Onya Dog, Ungwe Huene, Wagasununit. So just wanted to say hello. My name is Brandon Doxtator. Bear Clan from the Oneida Nation of the Thames. And thank you for welcoming me to this space. I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it there in person. I wish I could have, but I'll be honest, I'm a bad driver. And when you compound the weather like this, it's not going to work for me. Yeah, that's a great introduction, Tom, and thank you for speaking so elegantly about it. This project is really important when we speak about GardenShip and community activation. This, as they mentioned, this is a property that has been adjacent to the community, owned by Western University for some time, and had fallen into disuse. There had been a lot of garbage dumpings happening there. Land hasn't been taken care of. And so we really want to just kind of activate the community, get down there, clean it up as a first step initially in this process. And with the idea that we'd start forming a relationship, a partnership with Western University, with the City of London, and developing a land stewardship program from an Oneida perspective on that property. It's a very beautiful piece of land that borders the Thames River and has a huge variety of different habitats, from prairie grass to milkweed pollinator areas, small tree stands, and right into floodplains. So it's absolutely beautiful, and we're hoping to partner with Western University on that. And so over the last year, we've been working with people like Tom and to really get on the land. And this was kind of like we hadn't even asked Western yet. We were in the process of that, and we just said, you know what, like let's get out there. You know, it's better to what's the saying? It's better to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. You know, that land needed to be cleaned up. We had the opportunity, the time, and the means to do it, and so we went out there and got that done. And so you know, just wanted to say I want to go to Tom and to everyone else who's been putting this on, because it's really great to tell this story and to really see it through. And I'm really excited to see what happens in the future. So yeah, I want to go.
Yeah, before we do that, Brandon, do you want to say a word about Robert Antone, who is in the film?
Yeah. And thank you for that. So you'll see one of our elders who I had worked closely with over the last few years. He recently passed away, not even a month ago, from cancer. Really devastating. Rob was a happy-go-lucky guy who always had great opinions, great insight. He was an electrician by trade, and so I also work in renewable energy, and so that's how we kind of started our conversations. And he got really involved in the environment department as one of our elders who would come out on some of the contamination work we were doing, some of the work with the youth, and yeah, you know, so I just wanted to acknowledge Rob, the work that he put into his community. He was really passionate. He was a huge Toronto Maple Leafs fan, and we're really going to miss him. And we just wanted to acknowledge him through this film and at this time as so yeah, I want to that too.
Thanks, Brandon.
My favorite part about being on the land here is all of the noises, you know, the bugs, the rustling of the trees, you know, and the smells. I like to just sit and listen, you know, to what Mother Earth is telling me. My name is Brandon Doxtator. I'm Bear Clan from the Oneida Nation of the Thames. I work for Oneida as the Environment and Consultation Coordinator. Today, we're out just outside of Oneida Nation of the Thames. This property here is a 50-hectare property owned by the University of Western Ontario. There's been years of people dumping various things here, and we're out here today to come and clean it up and take a lead from both a partnership with Antler River and Oneida Nation to kind of help take that first step forward in managing the property here.
This is what a lot of our region in Southern Ontario would have looked like just a few hundred years ago. And being from, the city environment, we kind of just accept the turf grass lawns and the parking lots and the strip malls as normal, when really that's all very new. And when I come out to places like this, you see and hear wildlife that you don't get to encounter in London. And so I think this is sort of a glimpse of the past.
It's my first time here, and I was taken with how beautiful it is, how much natural, non-invasive vegetation is here. And as a land that borders the river, I see a lot of human and non-human systems coming together in this place.
I'm going to say about 40, 50 years ago, down at the river here, we used to go swimming in there. Today, with pollution in the Thames River, we can't do that no longer.
I think of garbage as a problem of object permanence. So when we're babies, everybody knows the game peekaboo. You play with a baby where you're there and then you go around the corner and the baby's like, oh, you're gone. Like, incredible, you don't exist anymore. And then over time, as babies get older, they learn, oh no, when you go around the corner, just because I can't see that person or that object anymore, it's still there. And so that's called object permanence. And I think we assume that adults, humans, are really good at object permanence, and garbage demonstrates that we're not. Because what happens is we take the garbage to the end of the curb and it gets picked up by a truck, and that's it disappears, right? Out of sight, out of mind. I think garbage ends up in natural areas like this, and the trees grow over it, and we don't see this, and so we forget that it's here.
You walk through here and you see all the garbage, and if we can remove that, that helps us to start envisioning more restoration for the land. So I think that's really important, that this is one of the first actions that we do. We show community that, hey, we're going to start cleaning up this land, taking care of it, and hopefully that leads to more activities like this in the future.
It really gives me hope to see all these people coming together to take care of a land that they don't necessarily benefit from or have any connection to, but to see the importance of cleaning this land and making it a space where cultural work, ecological work can come together and be done.
I think it's a really important outlet for folks that are suffering from ecological grief to be able to do something tangible with that. But to me, it almost feels like a little way of saying, I'm sorry. I have contributed to this in many ways. And by picking up the garbage and disposing of it in a proper manner, that feels like a bit of an apology.
I'm really excited for the opportunities that can happen on this piece of land here. Because it's owned by Western, there's an opportunity for Oneida and the university to partner on the management of this land. We could do so much more to rejuvenate and restore the land from a Indigenous-led perspective.
I look a lot at conservation work in my art and in my studies, and I see the role that white supremacy has played in the way that we have structured our ecological work, our conservation work, and how that framework of white supremacy has blinded us to a lot of what actually needs to happen. And I think that in a decolonial future, we have to be led in those ways.
The stewardship could be working through Western and the Oneida First Nation people, and they can just work together and maintain the land. So not just one group is going to do it, and like even the people who do come in, they could be a part of it as well. It's two groups, the more groups who's working towards that goal.
When we can find partnerships like this with Indigenous communities, with the Western science, with the biologists, and the elders, and bringing them in the same room and confirming through both the Indigenous knowledge and the Western science, and if they're improving on each other, that's really important.
Hello, everybody. It's Bob Giesick from the Great Lakes, and I want to talk a little bit about law. What is law? What does that actually mean? You know, many years ago, the old people always said that there was something here on this earth, this beautiful blanket of life, and all of the earth's laws were weaved into this sacred blanket. As Anishinaabe people, when we come to this earth, we too get weaved into that sacred blanket of law. And that is what governs everything. All of the animals know that law. The stars know that law. The clouds, all of the trees and the plants, they know that law. Even the rain knows it. Everything is connected into this beautiful blanket of life. And there's so much beauty and there's so much magic inside this beautiful blanket of life that we've been given. And as we enter this sacred lodge of life here on earth, these laws are all around us. It's the animals that are the leaders of our government. It's everything in nature that reminds us of these laws. That's the true law. That's something that we must follow as Anishinaabe people. How to be good, how to take care of one another, how to treat people with respect, how to respect the earth. All of that is coded in this beautiful blanket of life. Everything is there. And for all of the settlers and the newcomers that come here to these lands, we invite them into this beautiful blanket of life so that, of course, the next generations get to experience the beauty and the great protection of these laws. When we ignore these laws, when we don't follow those laws, then guess what? We become vulnerable to disease and death. We become vulnerable to all sorts of things that are not good. The law protects us. It protects us from disease, from famine, from sickness, from war. All of these beautiful things that exist in this great law is pure medicine for our people. And you know what? Our people are starting to go back. Our people are starting to recognize again that, you know what? We followed the wrong path. We didn't follow the right path because of colonization, because of capitalism, because of all those ism things. And our young people are starting to say no. Our elders are saying no. Everything we need is on the land. Everything that we need is in those clouds, is in the thunder, is in the ceremonies. And we're in a sacred story, Atsukan, right now, because people turn their back on those laws. They'd rather go in the Indian Act meetings and talk policy. They'd rather go to the parliament buildings and talk policy and legislation instead of sticking their ear out and really listening to what the land is telling us. You know, they say that as Anishinaabe people, we adopt those laws. We adopt those animals to be our relatives. We adopt those clouds. We adopt those trees and those medicines to become a part of our families so that we understand those laws, that we don't forget who we really are. And so go out there and adopt. Start making relatives in the forest. Start making relatives all over the lands. Naha miigwech. Thank you.
Anin, Oju, Nigane one donk indigenous, Objeshi and Dodem, Boarding and Donjaba. My name is Candace. She who sees the future or ahead is how I'm known by the spirits. I'm Martin Clan from Sault Ste. Marie, and the Cultural Justice Coordinator at LOSA. I just want to say thank you to Isaac for giving me permission to use this video always. I often get asked to go speak to law classes, and this is what I bring them. I ask, what is law? And this is the conversation we have. So I first met Michelle. Atlosa was doing, it was like in the pandemic when we couldn't see each other, and we were doing a lot of online series. And I got asked by Auntie Hallie to do a medicine making workshop, and Michelle came and attended that. And she emailed me after and said, hey, do you have any interest in this thing? And left it wide open. I was like, yes, 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 I love it. So I guess like as part of my job, how do I marry these things? How can, so part of my job is as a justice coordinator, I spend a lot of time in courtrooms. We do family law, criminal law, but the big part of what I do is circle work. And so we bring elders and community in where there's been harm, and we repair that harm in circle without the law, without courthouses, without police officers. And so I thought, you know, if I could collaborate with our children's program and bring children back to the land, to me, that's repairing harm. You know, that's part of justice work. That's the proactive stuff. That's not the crisis intervention. So yeah, we got to spend 2 beautiful days at the coves, and yeah, it was a lovely experience. And I think, I guess I would encourage you to look in the book, because in the almanac that Michelle has set out for you, there's a lot of really beautiful stories in there about how not only did we just spend a day together there, but the ripple of our time spent is phenomenal. I shared in there that I have my medicine pouch under here, I'm holding it. There was a young person, so we made medicine pouches on the land, and she put all her anxiety into this bead when she made her pouch, and she said, hey, can you carry my anxiety for me? And I was like, oh, like, sure, I guess, you know? And she's checked in on it twice, you know? So she's like, do you still have my bead? Like, I have some more stuff to put in there. I think eventually I'm gonna have to have a conversation, like, I can't carry this for you anymore, you know? I'm gonna take care of it for you, but I don't wanna carry it anymore. But yeah, this has been like such a privilege and an honor to be a part of this. And yeah, I don't see it stopping here in any way. So thank you, Michelle, for your thoughtful invitation. And also thank you to the youth for hanging out here, and just really nice to see your faces. Thank you. Yeah, so with that, I'll pass it on. Miigwech.
Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Reilly Knowles, and I'm a settler interdisciplinary artist living and working in so-called London here in the city. In my artistic practice, I am at work forging attentive and reciprocal relationships with the ecosystems I inhabit. At least that's my goal. Connecting deeply with other than humans is an essential part of my life, as well as my drive to create and share, which I see as intermingled missions. A big part of what I do is that I like to gather debris washed from the rivers here, and I like to forage plants from the forests. I then fashion textiles, drawings, and paintings, speaking of and made from my time learning from the creatures with whom I share my habitat. I'm interested in the Earth's interwoven forces of growth and decay, the taking, the giving, the changing, and the way these act upon the human body and its artistic creations. This past September, I was very lucky that Michelle invited me to facilitate a workshop at the Coves in which I shared some basics on ethical foraging practices, as well as natural dyeing with a small group of participants. Michelle then guided us all on a walk through the coves, and we used black walnuts, which had previously been collected from the area, to dye cloth and yarn, which the participants took away with them. These participants brought with them their own knowledge about reading the landscape, dyeing with natural materials, and other fiber crafts such as basket making. It was a real privilege to both give and receive understandings about the plants in the coves and how to create with them. So these walnut dyed materials, they took them away with them to use in their own projects, but a portion of them were also given to Michelle, as well as some materials that were dyed with black raspberries and goldenrod from the coves. And these she created with other workshop participants into a Careful Paths stitchwork. So that was her own project, which I'm sure she'll speak to later. So this was another instance where these materials were made as a community and then made into another textile work together as a community as well. So it took many stages. So the goal of my work in this project has been to convey the importance of working gently, respectfully, and reciprocally with the land when working creatively with plants. As an ecologically compromised site, bringing this ethos to my work with the coves was, I thought, especially important. So as Michelle mentioned previously, if you have a chance today, I hope you can see this ethos shining through in the beautiful embroidery that she and her participants created, which is on the community projects table. Thank you very much.
This coming together is a composing and recomposing of bodies, microbes, soils, leaves, industrial farm chemicals, mulch, burial practices, land relations, and other stories of living and dying alongside the polluted Deshkinzibi River where we all live.
This is a dance of more than two, shaped by the presence and absence of our two-spirit friend and brother, Billy, who has died. He was born in 1971 into the Turtle Clan of the Oneida Nation, where I, Montana, am from. He was adopted and raised alongside Kevin in the working-class neighborhood called Soho in the city of London, Ontario.
As Billy requested, his ashes were returned to where he was born, in Oneida, as well as with his adoptive mother in the city. Each space enacts land relations differently. Billy asked that we continue to collaborate with him, taking him on tour as we explore how loss and death can be refolded into a creative process. As matter breaks down, how might it emerge into something new?
Our coming together entangles Oneida, Gaelic, Sicilian, English, Irish, French, German, and many other unknown histories of settler colonization, forced displacement, immigration, adoption, and different enactments of human-land relations, all together in a messy whole. What happened and is continuously happening here? Who and what do we touch when we touch another? What other beings, spaces, and times are aroused?
Before European contact, the Oneida Territory included most of present-day New York State. In 1838, the Treaty of Buffalo Creek directed the removal of all Iroquois people from New York. The Oneidas were forced to resettle near the city of London, Ontario, and purchase 5,200 acres, known now as the Sovereign Independent Oneida Nation of the Thames. This area is also the home of the Adirondan, Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape people, who have long-standing relations to the land, water, and region.
How might I sense in the middle of these histories and attend to the grooves of this land? What does it do for each of us to turn towards our own non-innocence and complicity as a necessary step in order to confront world histories as histories we are differently entangled within and accountable to? Can we train ourselves to attend to the uneven distribution of shifting constraints, changing moment to moment?
Relations with our friend and brother Billy after they have died? How might we come in to relation to our queer two-spirit ancestral lineages? How might our practices now shape what it means to be a future ancestor for those to come?
in his language journal, to love is to be medicine for another. The Oneida word for love is ganalongkwasla. The word for medicine is honongkwa. If there is love, there is medicine. Tato gaya ganalongkwasla, negi honongkwa. Tato gaya ganalongkwasla, negi honongkwa. Tato gaya ganalongkwasla, negi honongkwa.
Hello, everybody. That was tense. I'm just warn you, I'm just the filmmaker. Everybody that was involved, if we can do like a warm applause for all the dancers and stuff. They are definitely the dreamers that made that happen. I was just there to essentially be a filmmaker. They actually taught me to be a lot more fluid with how rigid filmmaking can be. So I had a hard time trying to fit myself into their main mission. And it took me a while to warm up to it. And that performance was the first time that they broke me. Like, they broke me in with that performance. Because emotionally, I was not prepared. I encouraged them to do something like, I'm like, get rough, get messy, get sweaty, because it was hot. It was July out by Algonquin Park. So we were in the thick of it. And so what I didn't anticipate was being a third dancer. I watched them emotionally drain themselves for 27 minutes. We watched a 10-minute video. I cut down 17 minutes and threw it to the side to make something very intense and impactful. But the experience was intense and impactful. I was breathing heavily, and thank you to the audio team, the duo Wormwood, who made the mix and the music. They were able to embrace the heavy breathing sounds that were caught on camera and the rustling mulch. Because I had a sore back, I was sweaty, and then I started crying. I teared up from that experience that the three of us had and didn't realize that I was going to be dancing with them the way I did, because everything about that clip, that 10 minutes was, nothing was planned. The camera angles, the shots, nothing was planned. Didn't anticipate it. So some people do comment on some of the shots that we got and that we see there. That's how in tune we were. And you can kind of see this evolution of everybody's quite separated from one another. Even the camera feels separated. And eventually we're all there together at the very end of it. So it was quite the experience, to say the least. And then starting from that point, they had me hooked. And that's when I was working to understand even more what their mission was. And I wish they were here. I wish they were here to be able to speak on that, because they really know the heart of it. And I also helped guide the heart of it too, being the one who was observing them for about over a year making this project, because that was only part one of the entire thing. So the one thing that I do identify with this piece, though, is their mission to kind of bring their brother Billy, bring him full circle in his journey of identity. And through death, I think it was their brother Billy's last act of finding his identity. And so I just completely relate to how when we dissolve, we are the same in every aspect. And I feel like the most realistic way that we can help anybody with any problem in this world is through love, because we're all the same person, being, thing, organism. And in a world where we're so divided and split up by the clothes we wear and our opinions and our tastes and preferences, at the end of the day, we just have to dissolve and be compost. So yeah, and okay, yeah. So thank you. And the next video is going to be us. This is the event where we showed the entire film. Yeah. It's a very short and sweet video. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. In order for the artifact to work for this, though, we did have one strawberry.
Yes, okay. So I think the projects have been really impactful for the people we put them on for, engaged with, but also for ourselves. And I was thinking about, has the project changed what or how you're going to work with community in the future? I'm wondering if we should throw it to Brandon first. If you have any thoughts on that, Brandon?
Sorry, yes, can you just repeat that question
sure.
again?
How has the community engaged work you began with this project changed how or what work you're going to pursue in the future?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that the work that we set out to do that was captured in the film is kind of like the accumulation of a lot of different projects that I've been working on throughout the years. You know, it's like my background was more in history. I went to school for archaeology. So going into the environment field, it was like going back to school all over again in the community. And so, you know, we developed a lot of capacity. And this is kind of like the accumulation of all of that. So I'm really excited that it's geared towards that. And so it's really shaped, it definitely has really shaped the work that we're going to be doing moving forward. Specifically, like we're working with other universities. So, for example, we have partnerships with professors out of University of Guelph. We have a field school that's coming out from students from the University of Victoria that are coming out this summer. And so they're going to be on that land. Again, like this is kind of taking the bull by the horns and moving on that partnership. So, you know, it really has formed that community work and really opened us up to building those partnerships and those relationships and making sure that they're meaningful on both ends. So definitely.
Thanks, Brandon. Tom, did you want to build on that? Like, with your work with Antler River or with your new position or stuff you want to work with Brandon on?
Yeah, maybe I'll stick with what I want to work with Brandon on. There's two separate things. Like we've been working on things before this project and we have plans to work together on other projects too. So that's the larger thing is just we'll keep working together. We've got some ideas about maybe doing some cleanups at Oneida and then maybe Kettle and Stony Point, and going down to Amjanong and maybe doing some of building those partnerships through this work. But then the other one is I really want to see through this project started with creating this outdoor teaching space at Oneida. I think the University of Western Ontario has a real opportunity there to partner and that they should grab this opportunity. And we should encourage Western to do this as I'm doing right now, because I think it's a wonderful opportunity. You saw that piece of land and how big and beautiful, and you could imagine the projects and the things that we could, you know, do in that space. Working with someone like Brandon, I've worked with Brandon, and that's the other thing I would say. Western has this wonderful opportunity to work with Brandon, and that's something that should not be missed.
Reilly, did you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. This was the first opportunity that I had to run a workshop, and it was pretty scary at the start. I had to sort of crawl out of my secluded little artist studio to actually talk to people. But it was really incredible, and it's really made me think about what I'm doing as an artist and what I can do to incorporate more community into what I'm doing, because what happened at the workshop was that people brought so many different skills and perspectives, and what we produced was so much better than what I ever could have delivered by myself. So giving people and myself the opportunity to learn from each other and create something that's more than the sum of its parts together, I think I would really love to go in that direction more.
I don't think I'll ever stop bringing young people to nature. But I love that we have the coves as a space to go to now. I like really appreciated, it has such a rich history. And And I really like adding that element, like the historical element of the land, to a nature walk, you know, a medicine walk. And yeah, it makes me think a lot about, like I said, I spend a lot of time in courtrooms, and I've been even having conversations at work about like, this isn't it, you know, like this can't be it. So like, how do we move away from that stuff? And I like immediately I was talking to the executive director. I'm like, we have to go back to the youth. Like we got to go back to our young people. We have to like get on the land, that land-based learning, like being in relation to water and animals and plant kin. Yeah, so I think, you know, doing this project coupled with like the stuff that I get paid to do really brings a really awesome picture. And I'm so grateful to have gotten to know the coves better. Yeah.
With my work, I'm definitely open to expanding my filmmaking into bringing like humanity to what everybody here is trying to do. I think that's one thing that I don't see a lot, is seeing like a more humanistic side to the fact that there are people out there sweating, laughing, having fun. Maybe they don't want to be there. Maybe some are there because they just absolutely love being there. And there's just all these little intricacies that like, these are real people going out there doing real things, and this stuff matters. So if there is a way for me to invest my energy and time into bringing that kind of like emotional storytelling out to the forefront, then I would be all in. And so, yeah, that's what I think about there.
Great, thanks. This is a question that's been on my mind a lot, and I think these projects probably bring it up for you as well. And I'm thinking about how trespassing shows up in all of our projects, and in some of them literal and in some of them more metaphoric, and how it can be a political act to refuse to acknowledge, for example, someone's claim of ownership. And how does trespassing change who you ask permission from or how you ask permission? I know, Brandon, you said it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, but if anyone had any thoughts they wanted to offer on that.
I will. I go back to like being a child. Like, you know, when you're a kid and you're on your bike or you have to get to your friend's house, you don't care whose property you cut through. You take the shortest path to your destination, you know? And I think the idea of land ownership is so weird. Like, it doesn't belong to any one person. It belongs to, again, everybody, to all of us. It's a space for sharing and learning and growing and eating and being clothed and being housed, but without the ownership piece. I don't care about trespassing. I will continue to trespass. I do understand people's ideas of like, so like I trespassed to go fishing a little while ago, and the woman had concern, but the concern was about the fence. So I'm like, okay, well, why is the fence? You know? So I think it's like a good space for conversation. If, again, yeah, if people are willing to have those conversations, but I'm going to keep trespassing and I'll talk about it, but yeah.
I was thinking too about when you harvest medicines, or I know, Reilly, this is maybe something you keep in mind, maybe with different language, that when you harvest from a plant, you know, you're taking their permission into account. So I think about, there are other beings which we ask permission from. Does that spark anything?
It's honestly a really, really tough question, and I've been thinking about it for a while now since you introduced the idea, and I'm gonna keep scratching at it because it's tough, and I think when I think about trespassing in the Cove specifically, what came to mind over and over again was this idea of authority, and whose authority about what happens to the land do we respect? And, you know, if you take actions on that land to harm it and therefore harm the beings that are living there and living adjacent to it, why do you still have the authority about what happens to it?
Brandon, do you have, I heard just some little Zoom noise. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I really like this conversation. It's got me thinking about a couple things. You know, obviously trespassing, from the indigenous sense, you know, like you could go on and on about land dispossession, you know, indigenous people who've lost territory and treaties through successive land grabs and land cessations. You know, the Oneida people prior to colonization managed a territory of about 6 million acres. That through 200 years, through successive treaties, that territory was reduced to its smallest extent of 32 acres. That's our homelands back in New York. That video talked about that, about the Oneida people. You know, they really gave us a choice. They said, you know, either you convert to Christianity or you go, or we're going to kill you. And our people sold their land and said, we're out of here, you know, and like came to this territory here. So that's one thing I was thinking about, you know, and that active resistance that indigenous people continue to carry out, you know, because of the land disposition that's happened, you know, like I think of Titanega, you know, when the trains, when they blockaded the trains, like how much disruption that caused throughout Canada. But, you know, that train, that was territory that was originally Titanega First Nations reserve land that cuts through their territory. I think I might be wrong on that, but it's adjacent to their land, because that's very similar to what happened here in our community. And so, you know, they didn't have to put those train tracks through Titanega, you know, and look what happened. That's one thing that I'm thinking. The other thing I'm thinking when you talk about that is our one dish with one spoon treaty. This is a treaty between the Haudenosaunee and other nations that talks about, you know, all this land. It's like our nations were coming to butting heads on hunting territory, on beaver hunting territory, and the fur trade was ramping up, and we said, you know, hey, this is all our territory, this is all a plate that we all have to eat off of. We all have to survive off this land, and so not one person can claim ownership over it. So those are the two thoughts I had in that conversation.
I think about water and, you know, how a watershed or a river system doesn't obey boundaries, right? It doesn't, you know, the Métis scholar Zoe Todd has written quite eloquently about how water kind of confounds the colonial logic of, you know, of ownership and boundaries. And, you know, so water, you know, we are a walking watershed ourselves. We take water in and we release water onto this piece of the ground that I'm standing on, which then releases it into a river. We're all watershed, right? But we don't think that way. We think in compartmental ways that separates us from each other, from the ground, from the land. So I think the work of loving and caring for the earth is about trespassing. Fundamentally, we need to get more comfortable with trespassing, and and make that a practice. And when we see a boundary, I mean, the way that we're currently doing things is obviously not working, right? And that system, of course, wants to just reproduce itself, and that system is what's defining what is trespassing, right? And so we have to trespass.
Yeah, I was thinking about when we started doing the work in the coves. I did go to the city. I did talk to bureaucrats. I did talk to people about how I want to care for this land. Others want to join me. How can we do that? And it was just roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And finally, I said, we just have to do it. We are caring for this land. And we just need to be able to do that in a more efficient, collective way. And so I can't wait for you to give me a path or permission. We're just going to come together and do it. There was something else. I was thinking, I heard John Burroughs say something the other day on a video, but he was out on the land and he said, look, this is stolen Indigenous land, but they can't steal this. It's both at the same time. It's so complicated and it's so simple. It's stolen, but it can never be stolen. And it brings me back to the video that you shared about natural law. Like, that law will never be superseded.
Yeah, and I think, I could talk about this all day. I think, it's like theirs before ours, even, like they eat so we can eat. They live so we can be clothed. And it's like they're the most, like, plants and animals are so humble and giving. And yeah, like humans, we have it wrong. But that really is why that video to me is like an awesome tool to use when talking about law, and to like future law students and people who are currently practicing law. And then also to share just, I don't know, I just think everybody should see it, just to remember that, like, we aren't the only beings here. We're not the most important. We're part of a system.
Yeah. Marshall, did you have any thoughts?
I'm a filmmaker, so hopping a few fences for the shot is kind of like where I came from. So when it comes to trespassing, a sign that says trespassing, it's usually taken as a challenge. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's trespassing is kind of a silly concept, just because all it's really doing is protecting people's money, and that's all I can really think of it as. It's just somebody has money there, and they just don't want you on their money, essentially.
I guess on that note, maybe we can open it up for questions. I can hop down. It's okay.
I don't even think I'll need
Okay. They're recording it, so they want to hear you.
Oh, okay. Okay, it works. I believe trespassing by its very nature is divisive and has only caused more conflict among communities. And if we continue to allow it to take place, then we're only going to continue to hurt each other. And that is going to continue to divide us and only feed capitalism.
Did anyone want to comment to that?
I would agree. It's a very delicate process. You don't want to upset people. The goal isn't to upset people, it's to communicate. So trespassing in its brute forceness isn't the best way to go about doing it.
This is on it. I guess I had a similar comment. I'm from Alberta. And, this is an interesting idea, trespassing, because there's another political view that might trespass for different reasons. Complex, right? And so it's a tough word, is I guess all I'm saying, because there were people trespassing in my community for very different reasons. I'm thinking of the blockade at southern Alberta. I'm thinking of blockades in downtown Edmonton. I'm thinking of blockades in Ottawa. This is kind of trespassing, right? So how do we, I totally get the spirit of what you're saying. I'm 100% behind it. But how do we have shared trust so that kind of blockade doesn't just create more polarization? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's a lot easier to talk about trespass when we're talking about loving and caring gestures that align with our own ideologies. But you make a good point. There have been terrifying trespasses against, I guess, the public, against those spaces. And they, for me, made me feel very unsafe. And that, yeah, wasn't the side of it that I was considering. Does anyone want to comment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when you first posed this question, I looked up the word trespass, and I think like its etymology comes just from the words to pass through, and we all are passing through, and that's the question we're asking is how do we do that in a responsible way? How do we do it in a way that builds something? And you know, here I would go back to Jeff's comments at the very beginning, and what began this whole GardenShip in state, the two-row wampum, and this beautiful story of the butterfly and the dragonfly, you know, flying beside each other, respecting each other's space, not trespassing in a way. So I guess maybe it's, you know, how do we pass through to that point of coming apart, decomposing, ultimately. And what does that passing look like? And those are more complex than, you're right, than just saying we should always, every time trespass.
That is a really good question, because it does bring awareness that there's a lot of darkness in humanity. And I think the only way you can deal with darkness is to bring the light to it. And if we take trespassing and what that means in this world, in this society, for what it is, the only way you can get onto that land is through invitation. And I believe that at the very beginning, our people, my people, invited other people. They're like, oh, hey, you wash up on shore? Well, come on in. There you go. So I just feel like if you bring communication to the table and you have to put aside everything that you have all this pent up anger and aggression about, you can get to know people for who they are, and then they can get to know you. And then once you guys know who each other are, like, you know, all your little secrets, all your quirks, come on in. I know you like tea now, so I got tea for you, for instance. So I feel like when it comes to trespassing, it ultimately comes back around to invitation. And that just comes to being human and kind and loving and caring.
That makes me think about, hear it all the time. I'm an uninvited guest, right? So like built into that statement is this idea of trespass. But then once you're here, what kind of guest are you going to be? Yeah. Are there any other questions? Okay. Okay, I'll start with Jill because you're closest.
It's a very pragmatic question in that I just really appreciated all the labor that was happening in terms of removing the waste, which is a colonizer in itself. And I just wondered, is Western now aware that you have been cleaning up this space? And are they taking accountability for handling that waste in a responsible way? Because I know it costs money to actually get rid of waste in an appropriate way. And so have they been supporting those actions? Like, are they aware that that's happening, and are they behind supporting that cleanup and managing that cleanup economically?
Yeah, that's a great question, and kind of jumps back to this question of trespassing at the same time. So part of the grant that we got to do this project, we used that for actually disposing of the garbage. But we reached out to Western and said, hey, we are about to trespass onto this land and do this. And we reached out to Indigenous services or Indigenous initiatives, and representatives came out. We had great conversations. And so they are aware, and and Brandon, maybe you can speak more to where that process is right now. And it is that I do get a sense that there's a real partnership beginning here. And so again, it helps me reflect on this question of trespassing. We kind of said we're going to do this, but it was in a way to reach out, not in a way to, it was a way to reach out and kind of begin a relationship and find a common ground to build that relationship on, rather than, trespassing for just like creating antagonism. So I really, I appreciate your question.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in. So we have, as Tom mentioned, we have met with members of Western's faculty, and it's moving along. There's some, we put in a proposal to see if there's some additional funding to do some implementation work on the property. Western is, the Indigenous Initiatives Office that we've spoken to have been pretty supportive of that. So we're really excited to continue that process and move that along the line. But yeah, so we'll see what happens.
Okay, I think we're going to take our last question, and someone jumped up over here.
So, as it was explained to me, and to the best of my knowledge, in this world, there's no Indigenous language that has a word for land ownership. It's a foreign concept. That's what I don't know a lot about it. But I will tell you how it was explained to me by my friend Brian. So I'll have you all look out the window and have a look at Deshkanzibi. That was there 10,000 years ago. And it will be there 10,000 years after you and I turned it up. Does it make any sense to argue about who owns it? Does it make any sense who owns that while you and I pass through Turtle Island? I don't think it does. That turned on the light for me, and I just wanted to add that comment. And I think it's important to pass on stories that I've told. Thank you.
Do you know where Brian?
Brian Lee. So yes, from the United Nations.
Okay. Yeah. Did anyone want to comment back?
Thank you.
Love it. Oh. Okay. Is it quick? Is it a quick quiz? I think we could do one more, maybe.
Especially with Marshall, like that film, the physicality of it, and I just wondered about the physicality. Like this was all like your bodies are doing the work. Your bodies have to show up. Your bodies have to be in relationship. And also as a settler, I'm really learning about like, for me to heal my lineage, I do also have to embody that of being a colonizer and like how do I work that out in my own body? So I'm just wondering about the physicality and how that lands with each one of you.
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. Well, I mentioned it already. It was very sweaty. But yeah, my everything that I had like was just like pulled away from me in a good way. Everything was just poured into it, but I was willing, and it just being feeling like you're a part of, like you don't feel separated from everything, like the ground, the dirt, the air, the trees and everything. It sounds kind of Disney-y, but it's true. You feel aligned with everything when you just give it all that you have. And so at the end of it, that sensation was so overwhelming that I started to become very emotional. I started shedding tears. I could barely speak. I could barely stand because I don't know if you guys noticed, but there's very low camera angles the whole time. So your boy is out there 27 minutes of all that squatting, and a bit of a sore back afterwards too. Thanks for your question.
Did anyone else want to talk about the labor of their work? I guess it's all very embodied work, right? Like there was no way we could sit at home and read or write about these things. Like we had to physically show up and be in community and do them.
I just that the movie again and the embodiedness of that. It made me think about, you know, collecting garbage, or, you know, and I was thinking, is it a dance? You know, is it made me think that being with the water and this garbage and pulling it out and developing this relationship, not with garbage as like this is the worst thing, but with these objects. I think the film, our filmmakers did a really good job of showing kind of the beingness of those objects, the teddy bears that have been, you know, thrown away, have been enjoyed for some time, and now are kind of in a garbage bag, and what it means to connect with those objects that have a life of their own and move them through their space and their time. I think is part of Miriam and I, my partner who started this with, we started together, often talk about what it means to be constantly lifting things and pulling things and manipulating things and being manipulated by them in this way. And I think that is part of the meditative work that comes out of it, and the thinking. And for me, that's a place of poetry.
One thing that was so important to the workshop that I led was that not only were we using plants from the coves to make these dyed materials, but that we actually had to go through the coves and we had to see what kind of plants were there and think about our relationship to them, like see the trees, the kinds of trees that the drinks that we would have later were made from, identify the trees where the walnuts were coming from, be able to see the raspberry plants where I had collected the berries for the things that I had dyed previously. So making sure that all parts of that creative act were still connected to that physically being in the space and understanding it in that way.
I just wanted to make a comment on the last question about lineage of colonizers. And I just want to say that all you really need to do is just practice forgiveness for yourself. I think, and then we will practice forgiveness for you as well. And I think that's all that needs to happen. Because I'm 32. I grew up at this time, day and age. I don't blame anybody for what happened. Having any kind of generational like racism against other people, because a lot of my family was like that. They were quite racist towards people of white people, essentially. And I grew out of that because that started to affect how I saw other people, not just white people. So I think it's backwards to hold blame against anybody now, today, about this. So, and what I appreciate about all of this right now is that everybody is just working together on it. And so, yeah, all of this is just work that's being done to practice forgiveness. So just do that for yourselves.
That's a really generous statement. Thank you. I think we will have to end there. Can everybody help me thank our presenters today for all their work?
Is it cookie time?
Is it cookie? It's almost cookie time. Okay, hang on. We are going into a break. Do you guys want to, you can step down. You don't have to sit up there and look at me. I think you're on now.
just wanted to let you know what's happening with the program. So Michelle is going to carry on a little bit and take us through the almanac and the on-site review. And then we're fortunate to have Salah Hassan here, who's going to talk a little bit about what's in his contribution, which Michelle will introduce. And then we're going to have a break. And so please hang in with us. And then when we come back, we have one other panel and, of course, the keynote. Thanks.
Social time and tea is coming soon, I promise. But we wanted to introduce the almanac and on-site review before we go into this break, so you can pick one up if you're interested, and we'll flip through images of it now, and it'll be on while you're socializing. So yes, this is our launch. So we're offering, yes, the almanac as a gift, also the cookies, which have been mentioned, from Oneida Sweet Treats. So maybe, oh, I can do this. Let me see. This is, okay, yes, so this is the almanac. This is our cover. It documents the community engaged projects that GardenShip and State supported in hoping to carry the ideas promoted in the exhibition into action in the wider world. Okay, there we go. But Ruth Skinner, who worked as a project manager and editor on the publication, conceived of it as so much more. So instead of just archiving our efforts, the almanac enhances their scope and reach through knowledge sharing and hopefully fostering other collectively driven and care-centered actions. Chuck, do you think we could just let it go by itself? Thanks. I want to take a moment to thank Patrick and Jeff for their belief in these projects. As you can see from this presentation we just had, we achieved an incredible amount with generous resources, but not like all the resources in the world. And is it not? Okay, it's not good. Thank you, Tom. And I also want to thank Ruth Skinner and Katie Willem, who did beautiful design work and editing, and Iris Jansen, who edited the many texts. So I'm just trying to go through the almanac quickly to honor the contributions that made this little book so inspiring. So here we have some documentation of Tom and Brandon's cleanup, a little description of what was achieved there, and on the next page, a poem that makes me cry that Tom contributed. All right, so on the next one, this is a map of the coves that I developed. So the legend acts as a place for storytelling instead of just being the way that a legend usually functions. So kind of hidden in there as a way of wayfinding, it also connects you to the deep history of that place. Reilly was so kind to let us put an abridged version of the instructions for ethical foraging into the book. And foraging and dye making. There's a work in progress version of the map. This is a beautiful meditation on goldenrod from Paul Chartrand, who will be on our next panel. He installed this living phytoremediation work on the land, and it became a real focal point of the walks that I led to go and care for this living artwork. And this was the piece that Candace was talking about, where she shares some of the anecdotes and stories from being with the youth on the land. We also did a carp fishing day, and then we also tanned the skin from the one carp that we were lucky enough to catch. Sherry No guided me in the teachings on that to tan that carp, and the skin is also actually incorporated in the map along with the scales. So no part of that being was wasted, and we honored its life. And then we also had a clay in the Coves workshop led by Shauna Red Sky. They led us on this incredible meditative afternoon. It was a really beautiful experience. Yeah, so I'll leave that for you to look at. And then we have an essay on the compost recomposing relations work that Sweet Labor did. And then they include on the next page, they're calling them scores, so prompts for enacting this kind of work in your own space, in your own life. And then Embassy Cultural House contributed this excellent essay, I think collaboratively written between Olivia, Ron, and Jamili, if I'm not mistaken, and some beautiful images from their exhibitions that they've put on. So that kind of takes us through the almanac. And then also, we are launching on-site review. So the print version is available today. It's called Atlas Being in Place. This issue was a collaboration between Embassy Cultural House and GardenShip and State. Yeah, you can come and purchase it from me at the community projects table. These are just a few slides from the GardenShip and State's members who contributed to the issue. Mapping Iroquois by Jeff Thomas. And then Michael Farnan included this map depicting settlement history and species at risk in the Georgian Bay watershed. It's a new work that he created just for the issue. And here's my, again, my map. So I wrote this piece of prose about the work in the Coves, the work of the Coves Collective, and the layered history of this place and my relationship to it. And then here we see Francesca Vivenza's inclusion of a map that her husband had drawn and a short reflection on how maps can collapse space and time. And then on the facing page, we have a collaborative artwork and essay by father and son team, Patrick and Thomas Mann. So, and finally, here to help me introduce Atlas Being in Place is Salah Hassan, who graciously contributed an essay titled Uncertain Cartographies of Belonging, Arabic-Speaking Immigrants in the Early 20th Century United States. Salah Hassan is an associate professor in the Department of English and director of Global Studies in the Arts and Humanities program at Michigan State University. His recent publications include Radical Revisions, Barbara Harlow, and Criticisms Beyond Partition in the peer-reviewed journal Race and Class, Mapping Anti-Muslim Politics in the U.S. in Muslims and Contemporary U.S. Politics, published by the Harvard University Press, and Passing Away, Despair, Eulogies, and Millennial Palestine in the Edinburgh Companion to Postcolonial Middle East from the University of Edinburgh Press. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Hassan to speak more about his article.
Wow, this is really great honor and pleasure. It's the second time I'm actually here in the last 6 months. So, but I was here actually in 2019 at Western. Patrick organized an event where I spoke a little bit about this research. It was one of the first presentations I did on this research, and it kind of was in the framework of my ongoing research. So the relationship between critical post-colonial studies and Arab American and Muslim American studies, and sort of thinking about that. And I grew up in London. I grew up playing in the Coves. I spent a lot of time in the Coves. Most of my childhood in the summer was in the Coves, and in the winter I was on the ice and sledding. So I'm really looking forward to being able to look through the pieces in GardenShip and State and feel this really personally, this participation in this project with Patrick and Thomas and Jeff and Michelle. So I'm really grateful that I was able to be part of this. I want to thank Jamili and Ron also for bringing me in and encouraging me to be part of this. So many personal things. What I did was I took the piece is really long that I wrote, but it was kind of crunched down into about a third of what I wrote. And I'm working on an expanded version that will be published by MSC Cultural House this spring. And Olivia is going to work on the design of it. So I'm really happy and looking forward to that. It's going to be like about 100 pages and going to include a lot of the images and material. And this is sort of the work that will be. So it's related to what's on site, but it's a much expanded version. If we could go to go back one quick second. It might look like there's a typo there, but it's actually intended in the design of it. So there's a big space between Arab and American. It kind of looks like maybe that was an accident, but that's not. I just want to kind of draw your attention to that. No, I'm maybe not artists don't reveal those things, but critics do. I began with sort of thinking about where did my grandfather come from? Like a lot of this research is based on, that was a photo of my grandfather in South Dakota in the early 20th century. And so that's where I kind of began. I was looking at my grandfather and sort of thinking about Arab immigration to North America. We're in Canada not because of my grandfather, we're in Canada because of my dad. My dad immigrated at kind of close to the same time to Canada when my grandfather immigrated to the US. My grandfather was a little bit ahead of him. And then my dad went back and married my mom and brought my mom. But my mom's dad was actually a US citizen. And she had a half brother who was a US citizen who was born in South Dakota. So my mom already had an attachment to North America through kinship that was not really realized until much later when she married my dad and then came to Canada. And it just so happened that because my dad had settled in London and my mom's relatives happened to be in Detroit, she was able to build that relationship across the border historically from about 1940 through to her death. And we still have people in Toledo and Detroit and Windsor. So that connection is still there. So I was thinking about where did these people come from? One of the challenges is that they didn't consider themselves Arabs as such in the way that we think about it. And now Arab American studies is kind of asserting this idea of Arabness as part of an ethnicity in the US. And because Arabs historically were, they weren't white and they weren't black, but now they've sort of been crushed into this category of whiteness. And so for Arab American, especially on the activist side, they want to reclaim that. But really what they talked about as themselves as Syrians, because this is part of the Ottoman Empire, and it was like Syria, Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, of course, is Iraq and Syria. Syria included Palestine and Lebanon. And so Asham is the Arabic word that was used. And so on maps in the Middle East, Asham included all of that. And also on the European maps of the region, there was no partition. This was all part of the Ottoman Empire. Now, they did have provinces, and there were wilayat is what they called them. Wilayat refers to these provinces. And so they were administered for tax purposes and that kind of thing and census taking. Anyway, so Syrian American, if we go to the next slide, Syrian American, so my grandfather immigrated from Syria in the Ottoman Empire. So he was an Ottoman subject. He didn't have any citizenship. And Arabs were of a second-class status within the Ottoman Empire. So he immigrated. He went to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. That's where we have the first records of him, was in South Dakota. And so, this is just sort of a map of South Dakota at that time in 1915. I think this is the map from 1915. Okay, sorry, next slide. And so when he went there, you could see, if you look on the far page, there's a listing for him in Sioux Falls. It's an alphabet, it's the last one. Samuel M. Halleck inside, which is Seed. Seed is a name. I'm not really sure of the Arab origin, but there's a Seed family. Albert Seed was one of the elder in the community when I was born, and his wife was one of the first Muslims born in the U.S., first Muslim Canadian women born in the U.S. Her parents immigrated, and she was about the same generation as my mom. And my mom was one of the first Muslim Arab women in London. And so Addie Seed, so this side was kind of from that same family, and you could see that they lived in Prairie, 124 Prairie, but there's also a listing, I think in the next slide, maybe I didn't include that one. Okay, so he had a property. So he stayed in 113 South Main Street, and he had that property there. I don't know if he owned it. I don't have a record of him owning it, but he has listings in those directories from that period where he ran his grocery stores. If you could go to the next slide. And so this building on your right is the one of the buildings that the temple. It's called the Temple Court building, where these arches are. And so that's 113. That was 113 or 111 Main Street. It's no longer there. Jamelia and I actually went there in the summer of 2019, and we thought that was the building. We walked up and we were like, oh, this is the building. And then it was the building next to it, and it has been torn down since. So if we could go to the next slide. So this is what we think is sort of inside of that it was called the Basket grocery store. And if you could go back 2 slides, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So no, actually the map. Yeah. So you can see on 111 it says GRO. That's grocery. So all of these Sanborn maps from this period, and they're every year. These were maps that were used for insurance purposes. And so we were able to kind of track this actually right to so every year I could see, like, find in the directory, where did he live? Where did he have his shops? And then find those maps and then locate them and then try to find photographs of those places. So that was kind of the methodology that I was using. And it was generative in really interesting ways, because there's postcards of some of these buildings from the 1910s and 1920s. Okay, so if we could go up to, here. So he had several shops. He was quite successful. And so it's the gentleman in kind of the middle there, or not in the middle, but with the white shirt, leaning on the counter with his elbow leaning forward. And so that was my mom's dad. And I think this is around 1919. So this is right before he leaves. Okay, next slide. Okay, so they considered themselves Syrians, and so Little Syria was where the community. It was like a known community in New York City in the Lower East Side. And there's lots of writing, journalistic writing and photographs of Little Syria from that period, because it was considered to be kind of the ghetto. There was a Jewish and Italian neighborhood right nearby, and they also had sort of similar reputations as being these sort of, but also attracting people from the Upper West Side down there who were looking for, like, savory characters. Quite often artists, poets, musicians who wanted to get exposure, because there were performance venues there, actually. And so you had Arab performers who were performing both in Arabic and in American traditions. So you had, like, musicians who, and so there was, like, a kind of a life there that was very specifically this kind of modern, hybrid Arab culture. But most of the participants in that community, were working people, right? So they were just, like, working, trying to get jobs. And there's lots of interesting narratives of people who come and spend 6 months or 8 months and work in New York City and then go back to Palestine or go back to Lebanon. And you can find these, and these particular individuals, in contrast with, say, my dad, were relatively well educated and kept notes and wrote memoirs and sent letters back and stuff like that. So like, I've been looking at those things as try to get a kind of feel for what Arabs were experiencing, because we don't have that with my grandfather. There's no written record. He's represented, but he's undocumented in a certain kind of way. And so that contemporary notion of the undocumented kind of applies here a little bit differently. So how I found out about the map I'm interested in and I wrote about in On-Site was from my friend Mustafa Bayoumi, who's Canadian. He's from Kingston. He lives in New York now and teaches at CUNY, Brooklyn. And we kind of came up together in comparative literature, and we've been friends since we were children. We went to, like, Muslim camp together, and it's just a weird thing. I mean, we both did our degrees in comparative literature. We're both interested in the same topics. So he posted on Twitter this map. He went to Ellis Island. This is in 2016, and that's when I first saw it, and that's when I first started tracking this map. And it turns out that this map was actually discovered or first exhibited publicly by the Arab American National Museum in Dearborn. They mounted the exhibit at Ellis Island, or the Ellis Island Museum. And they were contracted to do that exhibit. So there's a kind of museumological kind of project there. I mean, it could have easily been brought here, the Arab American National Museum, did that exhibit almost 10 years ago now. And so this is the poster for that in 2013 when they did that. And so that it was in that exhibit context that the map came back into circulation. So this is a map from 1920 that was published in a book, and that's what I talk about in the on-site essay. It's like this map, like what does this map mean? How do we understand this map? What does it mean to us today? Why is it back in circulation? And that kind of thing. So next slide, please. Okay, so one of the things I was like, well, you know, they didn't just invent a map of the United States. What were the maps they were looking at? And then how do we read this map in relationship to the template map that they used to map these migratory routes across the United States? So if you go back one slide, I'm sorry, I needed to emphasize something that I forgot. So he says, awesome Arabic language peddler map from 1921, peddler map. So one of the, if you just go then to the maps, there we go. So if you read the Arabic script, at the top, the title refers to the peddlers. Like there's a reference here to the peddlers, that these were the peddlers' maps. And so when I first saw the map on the Twitter feed, before I knew it came out of the museum exhibit, I didn't know that the Arab American National Museum had done that exhibit until last year when I started researching the map again. And then I found that. And so when I didn't know that, I was like, was this a map that was made for like peddlers, like that somebody just wrote and then said, here, you know, and they circulated like kind of not really word of mouth, but hand to hand and kind of like an improvised map, because it's clearly like the handwriting. Now there was a print industry in New York in 1920, printing in Arabic, and it is a printed map, but it looks like maybe somebody just wrote the Arabic, like it could be handwritten. But I'm not sure, and I haven't been able to find the original map. I've only found it in print, but I found it in its original print location, which is in this book that was published in 1920 in New York City by these guys, the family that had this printing industry, and they were basically businessmen that were running a publishing company as a business. And so what they were interested in was Arab economic development, and the peddlers were the kind of the backbone, let's say, of Arab entrepreneurialism, or at least that was the story that was being told. And so everybody had like a peddler in the family. I can tell you we had them, like 2 or 3 peddlers in our family, like the older guys, right? Turns out there's actually a lot of women who were peddlers. In fact, women were very effective peddlers because they would go to these homes where there were women, daughters and wives, living in these farm communities, and they would sell them their goods. And the men would show up, and there was sort of a kind of suspicion about them. And so there were a lot of women who actually but the way that the narrative has been structured, both in our family and generally, is that these Arab American men were these peddlers. And they went out to all these places. And so why you find like Arabs, like Lebanese or Palestinians in these places, or Syrians or Egyptians sometimes, Iraqis occasionally in these places, is because these Arab men went out on the road selling their things, and then they kind of settled down one place, and then, you know, realized they could do a business there, and got like a real, you know, they went from being Amazon to being brick and mortar kind of thing. Like they settled in a place. And so how do we explain, you know, that there are Arabs in Sioux Falls, or Arabs in, you know, London, Ontario, or Arabs in Edmonton, or Arabs in all these other places, or far-flung places at the turn of the century? You know, when really the transportation routes were still kind of rudimentary. And so what I did was I was like, well, there are these old trails. So that's the map on your right here, which is the old trails map. And each one of those trails that is listed is like, it was like basically a colonial route map. It was like for the conquest of the Western frontier. I mean, these guys were going out there like Lewis and Clark, and they were mapping this, and they were taking people. So, you know, like when you watch like a Western, you're watching people on these old trails. That's sort of the idea, right? Like, so when, you know, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid are riding on these trails, they're riding on these old trails that were used for settlement. And so, I you know, now what's interesting is this particular map was published in a magazine right around the same time, about 4 or 5 years before the Arab map. And so I'm wondering, like, you know, like in 1920, you know, the highway system doesn't exist. You don't have an interstate. And all of the roads were being built, like paved over at that time for cars. But prior to that, these old trails were all like dirt roads. And when cars came along, the first thing they did actually is really, this guy who did this map, he was a surveyor, and he would drive all around and he would survey, and then he started mapping these things. And so he made it into his hobby of mapping all these old trails. And so he became kind of like the American Automobile Association's map maker, cartographer. And that map over there is actually kind of linked to it's not really the American Automobile Association, but there were all these automobile associations that were coming up in this time in the 19-teens, right around the First World War. And they were really pushing for an interstate at that time. And Woodrow Wilson was the president. Woodrow Wilson was a car fanatic. There's nothing he enjoyed more as sport than driving his car with the roof down. Like, he talks about that. So I found these quotes about Wilson talking about like having a car and how important cars were to his life. That he loved his car more than his wife. He says things like that. He's really strange. So what's interesting about this is like sort of thinking about like the colonial mapping of the US and sort of the consolidation of the nation. And here sort of like the Panama Canal versus a national highway system. So Panama Canal, of course, is like part of like the colonial expansion is like having the Panama Canal, the US is able to reinforce its hold on the Pacific and Hawaii, and then the Pacific Islands, and also California, and trade with Mexico and Central America. So it's kind of interesting in that map. I don't think that it serves clearly as the prototype for the Arab map. It looks more like, to me, there's certain things that like, there's graphic elements, like the way they do the coastline is similar. There's certain things that you sort of say, oh, they're doing the coastline, and some of these things are just sort of standard practice in map making. But when you start to look at them more closely, do they include things like in that map, there's no partitions for the states. In the old trails map, there's no partition for the states. So I'm like, well, okay, it can't be that map. And then you start to look and see what cities are noted and those kinds of things. And so I point to all of some of these distinctions and some of these parallels that you see between the maps and the essay, and sort of think about mapping in relationship to both how do Arabs make the United States Arab? Like, in what ways can Arabs do that? And how can you make Arabness fit within the borders of the United States? And so this is kind of in a way an assimilationist project, but it's not, because they're retaining the idea, and there's a kind of estrangement of the US when it's written in Arabic. And so there's several other maps of the United States in Arabic that were used in the Middle East to teach people, or in France. They produced maps of the United States in Arabic for colonial purposes in their colonies. But this is really interesting because this is like an Arab map made by Arabs in North America for the purposes of documenting movement in North America. Okay, next slide. So my grandfather, was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. He, in 1920, after a series of personal tragedies, not involving his business, his second wife died, and he had a young son, three-year-old boy, born in 1917. In 1920, he decides to go back to Lebanon. And so I found this is an ad, Sam Halleck, right? So, and you can see 113 South Main Street. And first-class stock of groceries, confectionery in a fine location, doing good business. Also 1919 Mitchell. I'm like, well, what the hell is a 1919 Mitchell? It's a car. So and you look it up, it's like a fancy car. Like, he had a really nice car for 1919. And good as new. My reason for selling, leaving the country. See Sam Halleck. So as blunt as that. So, like a lot of times in the Arab American narrative, or the Arab Canadian narrative, or the Arab Latin American narrative, which you also have, and they're very similar, but there's distinctions that need to be made based on the national formation of Canada, the US, or Brazil, and that kind of thing, or Cuba, where you also have a large Arab population, or Mexico, is that mostly people talk about, we're here because they came and stayed. They were resilient. They talk about them as pioneers. There's like really this odd language of Arab and Arab American studies of the pioneering generation. And but in the case of my grandfather, he goes back. And if he hadn't gone back, and this is kind of where I end the paper, if he hadn't gone back, we wouldn't be here, because he goes back and he marries my grandmother. And then my mom was born in Lebanon. And then my mom comes with my dad. She doesn't come because her dad. She comes because her husband was already in Canada. She could have claimed US citizenship. My mom could have done that. but she never did. And her brothers did. 2 of her brothers did. So we have like a whole branch of that side of the family that is in the States and that did claim U.S. citizenship, married American Arab women, and raised their children there. So like half of our family on my mom's side is Arab American and came through Canada, and we immigrated them here, and then they lived in London for a while, but then decided to go resettle in the U.S. With their wives and their families over there. So I got a little bit more I'm going to do here, and then I'll wrap up. How am I doing for time, Michelle? Patrick? Okay, so 2 minutes? 2 more minutes? Okay, let's go real quick then. Okay, so while I was looking at the consolidation of the US, the other maps, I couldn't stop thinking about Syria. Because I mean, we're talking about Syrian Americans in the census, they're marked as Syrians. My grandfather was considered a Syrian. You know, so I said, well, like, let's think about what's happening in Syria. And so what happens is that map up there is the one I showed you earlier, Syria, Mesopotamia. And you can see like Syria is that whole pink part, right? So what happens is that during World War I, this map below it, which is famously known as the Sykes-Picot, you can see Turkey and Asia is the title, a map of Turkey and Asia. And so areas A in the blue, we're going to go to the French. This was a secret agreement that the British and French made during the First World War to partition the Ottoman Empire when they won the war against Germany. So they would get the colonies. And then area B, including, and then the pink and the brown, those are going to go to the British. And that's the way things were until World War II, right? So they partitioned, but the actual partition didn't look like that. These were just like 2 guys, Sykes and Picot, who sat down and they drew these lines on the map. When it actually played itself out with after, like, you know, Turkey settlement and the Russian Revolution, which also changed some things, because I think the yellow was supposed to go to the Russian Empire, and then the Soviets denounced and revealed the secret treaty. So this is the way it ended up, and these are the borders that we now have in the Middle East. So Syria then becomes this separate thing from Lebanon. You can see, but because it doesn't have a dark border, it was under French. Lebanon and Syria were French colonies. And so, so when my grandfather goes back in 1920, this is the map that they have. And he had US citizenship, but when he left, you'll remember, he was an Ottoman subject, so he was like a colonial subject of the Ottoman Empire. When he goes back, he goes into becoming a colonial subject of the French. You see the next slide? I think I have yeah. So here, this document, I think this is my last slide. This document has, he's petitioning the French consulate in New York to allow him to go back to Lebanon in 1920. And there's a photo there with him and my uncle, who was born in South Dakota from my grandfather's second wife. And she was Arab. Her name was Aisha Jabara. And she's died and is buried in South Dakota. And Jamelia and I have been to see her gravesite. So he has to petition the colonial authorities. So he goes back into a situation of colonization. And so, and then this is a photo towards, you know, a couple more kids were born. But there's my uncle, who was born in South Dakota with the Fez, and my mom is the oldest born of this grandmother, of this wife, our grandmother. And this is in front of their house in the valley, in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. I think I'm all set. Is that right? Is that my last slide? Can you tell? That's my last slide. So thank you very much.
I want to thank Salah so much, including for coming from Ann Arbor Lansing to talk about his work, which is fascinating, and I invite you to come and meet him. I also want to say that in this wonderful edition, co-sponsored with the Embassy Cultural House, we also have Trump World. And I think that it was a more refreshing world that Salah was talking about than the Trump world that's shown in the issue.